My grandfather smiled across the glittering table. Tell me, Mary, how do you spend your $3.4 million trust fund? The restaurant froze. Forks hung suspended in the air. My mother's face drained of color so fast I thought she might faint. I blinked. What trust fund? My name is Mary Hart. I'm 27 years old. And that single question, asked by a man I barely knew, detonated everything I thought I understood about my family. 3 hours earlier, I'd received a call from my mother. Her voice was unusually bright, almost manic. Darling, your birthday is this Saturday. Atelier Cren. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. I'd lost my job that week. A marketing firm restructuring. 2 weeks severance in a cardboard box. The rejection emails had been piling up in my inbox like evidence of my own incompetence. The last thing I wanted was to sit across from my parents while they discussed their upcoming trip to Bali. But saying no would have meant a fight I didn't have the energy for. So I went. The restaurant was everything I wasn't. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light onto tables where billionaires and old money families conducted their lives. I'd taken the bus there. I was wearing a black dress I bought on sale 5 years ago. My parents were already seated when I arrived. My father in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My mother in silk that whispered money with every movement. They looked like they belonged there. I looked like I was serving them. You look tired, my mother said, studying my face with faint disapproval as I sat down. I lost my job this week, I said quietly. She waved her hand as if batting away an insect. You'll bounce back. Now let's not talk about unpleasant things. She was already scrolling through the wine list on her phone. My father gave me a curt nod and scanned the room for someone more important. I had grown used to this. The dismissal. The distance. For as long as I could remember, their love came in the form of absence. When I was in college, I'd called my mother about a textbook I couldn't afford. $300. She'd made me feel ashamed for asking. Get a job at the library, she'd said. Be resourceful. I'd paid $20 for an outdated edition and spent the semester borrowing notes from classmates. That B on my transcript was a permanent mark of what happened when you depended on people who would never come through. After college, I'd worked. Late nights. Weekends. Soul-crushing design jobs for companies that paid late and demanded endless revisions. Instant noodles. Patched clothes. A second-hand laptop that overheated with 3 browser tabs open. I had told myself my parents were teaching me independence. Building my character. I now understood they were just teaching me not to ask questions. We made small talk at the dinner. They talked about friends, investments, their upcoming trip. I listened and felt myself disappearing. Then the energy at the table shifted. My mother's back went rigid. I followed her gaze. A tall man with thick silver hair and sharp blue eyes was walking toward us. He wore a perfectly fitted dark suit and moved with the kind of quiet authority that made people step out of his way. My grandfather, Robert Sterling. I hadn't seen him in over a year. Dad, my mother said, her voice tight and strained. What a surprise. Oh, but I did, he said, ignoring her. He looked at me and smiled with genuine warmth. I wouldn't miss my granddaughter's 27th birthday. He pulled a chair up and sat beside me. My parents exchanged a panicked look. For the first time that evening, I felt seen. He ordered a whiskey and asked me about my apartment, my work, my life. When I mentioned the layoff, his expression hardened with real concern. That's tough, Mary. But you're talented. You'll land on your feet. Unlike when my mother said it, I believed him. My parents watched him like he was a bomb about to detonate. Then he lit the fuse. He set down his glass with a soft click and looked at me with that same warm smile. The air went still. So, Mary, he said, perfectly casual. Tell me, how have you been spending your $3.4 million trust fund? The silence was absolute. Heavier than sound. My own heartbeat was all I could hear, frantic and painful against my ribs. What trust fund? I whispered. My grandfather didn't take his eyes off my parents. The trust one set up when you were born, Victoria, he said, his voice dangerously calm. I funded it with an initial investment and added to it every year on her birthday. The terms were very clear. You and James would manage it until she turned 25. Then it became hers completely. That was 2 years ago. My mother let out a sound that wasn't quite laughter. Too loud. Too high. Brittle with desperation. Dad, you must be mistaken. It was just a small college fund. We used it for her tuition. That wasn't true. I'd paid for my tuition with scholarships and mountains of student loans. I opened my mouth to say so, but my grandfather spoke first. Don't, he said, and the single word was etched with steel. He nodded to a woman sitting alone at a nearby table. She stood, walked over, and placed a slim leather folder on the table. Michelle. His assistant. His shadow. She'd always been there. My grandfather slid the folder toward me. My hands trembled as I opened it. The top page was a summary statement from a private bank I'd never heard of. The account was titled, The Mary Hart Irrevocable Trust. At the bottom of the page, in bold black letters, current balance, $2,034,719. The number didn't make sense. It was impossibly large. But my grandfather had said $3.4 million. Where's the rest? I asked, looking up from the paper. My father's voice was thick and rough. It's complicated, Mary. The market, investments, they go up and down. It was 90% treasury bonds and blue chip stocks, my grandfather said, his voice like ice. It was designed to be stable. It wasn't designed for you to play with. My mother's composure cracked. We used some of it, she whispered. We had to. For family needs. We were always going to pay it back. $3 million worth of needs, my grandfather said softly. Michelle pulled out a second set of papers. A detailed list. She began to read, her voice clear and dispassionate. February 12, 2019. Withdrawal of $450,000. Purpose. Mortgage payment. The Marin House. The glass mansion. They'd bragged about paying it off. June 3, 2020. 2 withdrawals of $140,000 each. Total, $280,000. Purpose, automotive purchase. The matching Teslas, his and hers. They told me it was a reward for my father's success at work. September 21, 2021. Withdrawal of $320,000. Purpose, home renovation. The Marble Island. The Italian appliances. The kitchen they posted all over Instagram. Every luxury. Every trip. Every boast. All of it was paid for with my money. Money I never knew existed. Money that should have paid for my education, my security, my life. January 10, 2024. Michelle continued. Withdrawal of $1.8 million. Purpose. Property purchase in Malibu, California. The Malibu house. Their retirement nest egg. The crown jewel of their carefully constructed empire. Bought with my future. I stared at them. 2 strangers in expensive clothes. Their faces had gone pale and drawn. They looked like common criminals caught in the act. You stole my future, I said. The words came out flat and empty. My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling. No, Mary. We were protecting it. Managing it for you. My grandfather stood. His tall frame cast a long shadow. His voice was low and final. No, Victoria, he said, looking down at his daughter with profound disappointment. You were robbing her. The word robbing hung in the air. Thick. Suffocating. Other diners were openly staring now. The weeping woman. The furious old man. The pale girl in the middle of the wreckage. My grandfather held out his hand, palm up. Give me the keys. My mother stared at him, confusion and fear mixing on her face. What keys? All of them, he said. The house. The cars. Everything. Now. She hesitated, clutching her handbag like a shield. My father shot her a panicked look. But my grandfather's gaze was unyielding. With a defeated sob, my mother fumbled in her purse. Her hands shook so badly she could barely grasp the keychains. She pulled out 2 Tesla key fobs and a larger ring with the house keys. She slid them across the polished wood. They made a soft metallic whisper before stopping in front of me. My grandfather turned his eyes to me. They're yours now, Mary. The house. The cars. Every property bought with your money. It all belongs to you. I could only stare at the keys. Symbols of a life I'd only ever seen from the outside. My mother broke down completely. Tears streamed down her face, destroying her perfect makeup. Please, Dad. Don't do this. We're family. We can fix this. I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just a vast, cold emptiness. Family doesn't steal from family, my grandfather said. He gestured for the bill and paid with a black credit card without looking at the total. As we left, I glanced back at the table. My parents were still sitting there. 2 beautifully dressed statues in a sea of glittering light. Utterly and completely alone. They didn't even look at each other. Outside, the San Francisco air hit like a shock. My grandfather's driver was waiting with a black town car. As we slid into the back seat, silence was a relief. We drove through the city, lights blurring into streaks of color. I clutched the keys in my fist, the metal edges digging into my palm. After several minutes, my grandfather finally spoke. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Mary, he said, his voice heavy with regret. But there was no other way. They wouldn't have listened to reason. Why now? I asked. Why tonight? He looked out at the passing streets. Because they were planning to run, he said grimly. They had one-way tickets to Costa Rica for this coming Tuesday. I hired an investigator. They were moving the last of the money into an offshore account. By Wednesday they would have been gone. And you would have had nothing. The cold inside me turned to ice. They weren't just thieves. They were preparing to disappear. To vanish with the last of my life and never look back. My voice broke. So this dinner wasn't a celebration. He turned to look at me, his blue eyes filled with sad resolve. No, he said. It was a trap. And they walked right into it. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, it was almost impossible to grasp. This wasn't a mistake. This was a long, deliberate con perpetrated by my own parents. They had invited me to my own execution, planning to offer me one final expensive meal before they vanished with the last of my life. But my grandfather had turned the tables. The trap had been for them all along. The car pulled up outside my apartment building. It looked shabbier than ever compared to the world I just left. My grandfather walked me to the door. Get some rest, Mary, he said gently. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow. We have a lot of work to do. I nodded, unable to speak. I watched him get back into the car and disappear into the night. I climbed 3 flights of stairs and unlocked my door. Madison was on the couch watching a movie. She took one look at my face and turned it off. What happened? She asked softly. I opened my hand and let the keys clatter onto our small, wobbly coffee table. My parents have been stealing from me my entire life, I said, my voice finally finding its strength. And I think I just took it all back. That night sleep was impossible. I sat on my lumpy sofa in the dark, the keys still clutched in my hand. The metal was warm now, molded to my grip. My mind was a hurricane. The scene at the restaurant played on repeat. My mother's brittle smile. My father's ashen face. My grandfather's voice like stone. You were robbing her. Madison made me tea and sat with me. She didn't overwhelm me with questions. She just listened, and her anger was a protective shield. "They're monsters, Mary," she whispered, her eyes fierce. "What they did. It's evil." Hearing her say it helped. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was theft. It was abandonment dressed up as love. The deepest cut was the memory of that phone call in college. My mother's cold disappointment over a $300 textbook. She'd had millions of my dollars at her fingertips and had chosen to humiliate me instead. But there was something else now, something cold and clear settling inside me. The shock was receding. In its place was a strange, hard calm. The part of me that had spent a lifetime trying to earn their approval had died in that restaurant. I was done with grief, done feeling small. I picked up my phone. My hands were steady now. I scrolled to my grandfather's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert and clear as if he'd been waiting. "Mary," he said simply. "Good morning," I said, my voice even. "I've had time to think. I want to fix this legally. Completely." There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear the faint sound of a smile in his voice when he replied. "Good," he said. "That's the answer I was hoping for. My attorney Michael will handle everything. He's the best. He'll be in touch within the hour." I set the phone down and stared at the keys on the coffee table. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was going to take back everything they'd stolen. And I was going to do it quietly, legally, and completely. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and radiated competence that made me feel less alone. Michael Vance. My grandfather's attorney. He didn't offer condolences. He got straight to the point. "This is misappropriation of trust funds," he said simply. "Breach of fiduciary duty. We're filing for an immediate injunction to freeze every known asset they hold. Bank accounts, property deeds, vehicle registrations, everything. They won't be able to move a single dollar." He emailed me documents. Dense pages of legal language I barely understood, but the purpose was clear. At the bottom of each page was a line for my signature. For years, my name had been a liability. Now it was a weapon. I printed the papers at a copy shop, signed each one with a firm, clear hand, scanned them, and sent them back to Michael. It felt like signing my own Declaration of Independence. The next 72 hours were a blur. Michael was a force of nature. Subpoenas were issued. Audits were ordered. The quiet storm inside me had manifested into a legal tempest, and I was at its calm, clear center. I didn't have to scream or yell or confront my parents. I just had to sign my name and let the truth do the work. By Saturday afternoon, Michael called. "The injunction was granted," he said. "The Malibu house is frozen. The Marin property is frozen. Both Teslas have been repossessed and are being held in a secure facility. Their personal bank accounts are locked pending the audit. They can't touch anything." I closed my eyes. Frozen, locked, repossessed. These weren't words of revenge. They were words of justice. That night, Madison brought home cheap champagne. We drank it out of mismatched mugs sitting on the floor of my apartment. "To the quiet storm," she said, raising her mug. I smiled. A real smile. "They stole years from me, Maddie. I'm done letting them." 3 days later, the summons came. Not a court date. A mediation session. My parents' newly hired lawyer wanted to talk. The meeting would be held in my grandfather's corporate headquarters downtown. The irony wasn't lost on me. For my entire life, I'd been kept out of that world of glass towers and silent, powerful men. Now I was walking into its heart. The morning of the meeting, I felt a tremor of old anxiety. What should I wear? It wasn't about fashion. It was armor. I chose a dark blue dress and a black blazer, the most powerful outfit I owned. Madison stood by the door. "You look like a CEO," she said, her voice full of pride. Go in there and own them, Mary. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and steel. I gave my name to security. They handed me a visitor's pass without a second glance. The elevator rose silently to the 50th floor. My grandfather and Michael were waiting. Grandpa Robert gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. You're ready for this, he said. We walked into the boardroom, a long, intimidating room dominated by a massive mahogany table that reflected the city skyline like a dark mirror. We took our seats at the head. A few minutes later, the door opened and my parents walked in with their lawyer. The change in them was shocking. The regal confidence they worn like armor was gone. Without access to my money, they looked smaller, diminished. My father's suit hung off his frame. My mother's face was pale beneath heavy makeup. They avoided my eyes as they sat on the opposite side of the table. Their lawyer cleared his throat. We are here today to find an amicable solution to this unfortunate family misunderstanding. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This is not a misunderstanding, he said, opening his file. This is felony misappropriation of trust funds. Let's not waste time with euphemisms. My mother flinched. She finally looked at me, her eyes pleading. Mary, darling, this is all a terrible mistake. We were trying to protect your future. The money was just sitting there. We invested it for you. We were always going to give it all back. The lie was so audacious, so insulting that it didn't even make me angry. I felt a strange, detached calm. I looked her directly in the eye. By spending it? Was the Malibu house a long-term investment for me? Were the Teslas part of my portfolio? Her face crumpled. My father, seeing her falter, switched tactics. He slammed his hand flat on the polished table. The sound echoed in the silent room. We gave you life, he boomed, his face turning blotchy red. We raised you. Everything we did was for this family. You are an ungrateful child. The ungrateful accusation. Their favorite weapon. The one they'd used to keep me in line my entire life. But it was useless now. You gave me life, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the glass wall behind me. And then you sold it, piece by piece, to pay for your cars and your vacations and your houses. The name you're so proud of is the name of thieves. My father's jaw dropped. He looked at me as if he'd never seen me before. He was right. He hadn't. Michael slid a document across the table toward their lawyer. This is a summary of the charges we are prepared to file with the district attorney's office, he said clinically. Misappropriation of trust funds. Multiple counts of wire fraud. Conspiracy. You're looking at significant felony charges. Prison time. The word hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. My mother let out a choked sob. This was no longer about money or shame. This was about iron bars and concrete walls. Mary, no, she wept, her hands clasped in front of her like prayer. You can't. We're your parents. We love you. Please. I'm begging you. Everyone in the room looked at me. My parents. Their lawyer. Michael. My grandfather. The entire war had come down to this single moment. My grandfather spoke, his voice quiet. It's your choice, Mary. Completely. Do you want to press charges? I looked at them. Two strangers in designer clothes, their faces streaked with tears of self-pity. I saw the ghost of the little girl who craved their approval, the college student shamed for needing a textbook, the young woman struggling to pay rent while they drank champagne. I saw the one-way tickets to Costa Rica. They weren't begging for my forgiveness. They were begging to escape the consequences of their own actions. I took a deep breath and looked directly at my grandfather. Yes, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a bomb. My mother let out a wounded cry. My father stared at me with pure disbelief and hatred. But I didn't look away. For the first time, I was the one drawing the line. The decision to press charges ignited a firestorm. My quiet, personal battle became a public spectacle. Facing real prison time, my parents backed into a corner and decided their only way out was to destroy me. The headlines hit like a bomb. Hart family feud. Local philanthropists accused of stealing daughter's $3.4 million trust. Their smear campaign began immediately. They didn't give interviews themselves. Instead, anonymous sources began talking to gossip columnists. I was described as troubled, unstable, prone to exaggeration. They claimed their senile and vindictive father was manipulating me to settle old scores. I read the first article online sitting in my apartment. The words made my vision swim. She has a history of mental instability. I called Michael in a panic. Let them talk, he said calmly. They're handing us ammunition. We have something they don't. What's that? I asked. The truth, he said. And a mountain of paperwork to back it up. My grandfather's legal team released documents to a reputable financial journalist. Withdrawal statements, property deeds, routing codes, hard, undeniable facts that vague accusations couldn't touch. Suddenly the narrative changed. It wasn't about a troubled daughter anymore. It was about $1.8 million for a Malibu house. It was about $280,000 for matching cars. Facts. Numbers. Evidence. The legal process that followed was brutal. Depositions in sterile conference rooms where their lawyer tried to twist my words. Long days under fluorescent lights where I sat calmly and answered every question. I told them about the textbook. I told them about the monthly phone calls where they bragged about vacations. I told them about the financial literacy book. With Michael by my side, I found a strength I never knew I had. The day the judge handed down his final ruling, the sky was gray and overcast. The courtroom was silent. The evidence was so overwhelming that there was no trial. Just a civil case decided in a final hearing. My parents sat at the defendant's table looking like ghosts. Their slick lawyer was gone, replaced by a court-appointed attorney. They had run out of money. The judge read his decision in a dry monotone, but his words were a symphony of vindication. He found them liable for the full amount of missing funds, plus interest and legal fees. He ordered the immediate sale of both properties with all proceeds returned to the trust. He finalized a restitution order, a legally binding document that would require them to pay a percentage of any future income they earned until the debt was settled. Because I had chosen not to pursue the criminal charges to their fullest extent, they avoided prison. But they were left with a life sentence of debt and public disgrace. They were ruined. They didn't look at me as they were escorted out of the courtroom. I didn't feel a surge of triumph, just a profound sense of exhaustion and a quiet, somber sense of balance. The scales had finally been set right. That evening, I had dinner with my grandfather at his quiet, stately home. He looked friendlier than before, the fight having taken a toll. We sat in his library surrounded by old books and the smell of leather. "You were brave today, Mary," he said, swirling amber liquid in his glass. "I was just tired of the lies," I replied. He looked at me over the rim of his glass, his eyes filled with deep, sorrowful wisdom. "Your mother was always concerned with appearances," he said, "with the decoration of life. She never understood the foundation. Blood makes you related, Mary. Character makes you family. You chose the foundation. I'm proud of you for that." In the weeks that followed, the money began to return. Not in a single glorious check, but in sterile electronic transfers as assets were liquidated. The numbers were so large they seemed abstract. For a while I didn't touch it. I just let it sit there, proof that it was all real. I continued living in my apartment with Madison, working on freelance projects. My life externally unchanged, but internally everything was different. The constant anxiety about money that had been my companion for my entire adult life was gone. My first major decision was to find a new place to live. Not a mansion. A sanctuary. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere with light. Somewhere that felt safe. I hired a real estate agent and gave her a budget that made her eyes widen. We looked at a dozen places. They were all beautiful, but none felt right. Then she took me to a building in Pacific Heights overlooking the bay. The apartment was on the 7th floor. The moment I walked in, I knew. Afternoon sun streamed through enormous windows. The walls were soft white. The floors were warm, gleaming hardwood. And the view of the bay and the Golden Gate Bridge standing proud and red in the distance, it stole my breath. "I'll take it," I whispered. The day I got the keys, I walked into the vast empty space, my footsteps echoing on the wood floors. For a moment, a wave of imposter syndrome washed over me. Did I deserve this quiet luxury? Then I remembered the courtroom, the depositions, the smear campaign. I hadn't won the lottery. I had fought a war. This apartment wasn't a prize. It was my reparations. I spent the first few days just being in the space. I bought one comfortable armchair and placed it by the window. I would sit there for hours watching the fog roll in and burn off, watching container ships glide silently across the water. When Madison came over for the housewarming, she walked in and her jaw dropped. "Mary, it's a palace." "It's home," I said, feeling the truth of the word for the first time. We didn't have a fancy party. We ordered greasy pizza and cheap Chinese takeout, our old comfort foods. We sat on the floor of the empty living room and drank cheap wine out of 2 elegant crystal glasses. It was a perfect blend of my old life and my new one, a symbol that the money hadn't changed me, but the journey absolutely had. "How does justice taste?" Madison asked, raising her glass. I looked out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled over the bay. A tear traced a path down my cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. "Like peace," I said, my voice thick with emotion, with a side of exhaustion. Months passed. The city transitioned from summer to autumn. I settled into my new life, creating routines grounded in peace rather than survival. I started a small design agency. I traveled. I painted. I slowly rebuilt the person I was supposed to be. I heard about them sometimes. Through my grandfather, I learned they had lost everything. They moved into a small rental apartment in Oakland. My father found only a low-level consulting job. My mother worked part-time in retail. The restitution payments were automatically deducted from their paychecks each month, a constant, humiliating reminder of their debt. I never felt joy hearing this. There was no pleasure in their downfall, only a quiet sense of balance, the feeling of a world set right. One evening, I visited my grandfather. He was getting frilier, his movement slower, but his mind was sharp. We sat in his library. "You learned something they never did," he said, looking at me over his glasses. "What's that?" I asked. "That love without integrity is just decoration," he said. "A pretty facade on an empty house. You chose the foundation. I'm proud of you for that." On my way home, my route took me past Atelier Crane. The restaurant was lit up, glittering under the stars. Through the large windows, I could see people in expensive clothes laughing and raising their glasses under the crystal chandeliers. Strangers living out a scene that had once been the site of my life's demolition. I felt a ghost of the panic from that night, a faint echo of heartbreak. But it was distant, like a storm seen from miles away. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I just kept driving, my hands steady on the wheel, my eyes on the road ahead. I had no desire to burn the place down. No need to relive the trauma. The story was over. Some stories don't need a fiery, screaming revenge. They just need closure. And mine ended with the quiet hum of my car's engine as I drove toward my peaceful home, leaving the past behind in the rearview mirror. My parents stole my future and called it love. But I took it back quietly, legally, and completely. If you've ever been betrayed by family, know that your truth is the most powerful thing you own. Your character is what defines you. Your strength is not in revenge. It's in choosing what's right, even when it costs you everything. That's the real victory.